It's a scientific formula effectively reduced to simple terms so everyone can try. It's a perfectly legal, non-chemically induced, logically natural high. So turn on your mind to wisdom, turn on your heart to love, turn on your soul but natural, turn on to God above. Oh, turn on your mind to good news, turn on your heart and care, turn on your soul to something sure, turn on to God, He's there. Wisdom, love, woo, natural, hallelujah right there, above, good news, care, sure, He's there. Oh, turn on your mind to others, turn on your heart to feel, turn on your soul to perfect peace, turn on to God, He's real. Oh,
You know, I was just thinking about how one of the myriad problems with society is we don't have enough easy listening of a genre left. I mean, it's one of these. We could probably do a postmortem on that very topic. It's just the death of easy listening, and it's probably one of those things where I was talking. I said you could probably trace most of the ills in society back to kind of two events, and the death of easy listening might be the third. The first is.
Are you talking about Christian yacht rock? Is that what you're on here?
Yeah, but they're sort of like they're not a perfect circle, but I mean it's a pretty tightly knit Venn diagram there. But if you go back, mandating that businesses ban indoor smoking was the first thing. Everything. The second one is when people started calling, "Hey, you want to go get a coffee?" or said, "I drank 4 coffees today." So if we ever did that with pizza, like, "Hey, you want to go get a pizza?" and then someone hands you a single slice, you would be upset. We don't do that with anything else. And the third, the death of easy listening. It's an all-encompassing genre. It can be all things to all people. You can play it at any time, in any situation, and it's fine.
This from a punk rock fan, so take it for what it's worth.
All things to all people. That being said, this is Presbycast, your faithful leader in I don't know what's the in Reformed poop posting. I guess is probably the best way to say that. I don't know if there's a better way to say it, but we're here. We've got some more guests. For the first time, we have a guest who's outside of our time zone. So he's accommodating us. So this is a really new frontier for Presbycast. We're not bending over backwards for this one. That said, I'm still exhausted, and I'm still Presbyterian, and Chortles Weekly is here as well. I've already said too much. This episode's going to be awful. Not because of our guests, just probably more because of me. But Chortles, introduce our guests. I think this topic is going to be a considerable amount of fun. And if our house was shaped like a wheel, this would be firmly in it. So, continue.
In the wheelhouse. Yeah, so our guests are the Restless podcast guys. And they describe that as a postmortem on the YRR, which of course stands for Young, Restless, and Reformed Movement. And I was trying to describe this show to someone. I said they sound like us if we were smarter and better prepared and slightly less entertaining. So Matt and Michael, it's great to be with you. I've been listening to a lot of your shows lately, and again, it sounds like I'm listening to us, except better. So, tell us as much about yourselves as you want, and why in the world you embarked on this ill-fated venture.
Well, I'll just say I'm overjoyed to be on the worst episode of Presbycast ever. If that's what this turns into.
That's very subjective. You may think that at the end, but we've. I know I've remarked on this. The worst episode of Presbycast is sort of like being the worst dressed person at Walmart. You might walk in forgetting to wear pants, but someone after you comes in forgetting to put on underwear. So there's always going to be like one more person.
Oh man,
yes,
yeah,
yes.
And that's why we're a little less entertaining too. And so, I'm Matt. I'm the host. I am an RTS student of the hybrid variety. If some of your listeners know what that means, the show started one day because Pastor Michael and I were eating pizza, as we are off to do when we are together, at a little place in the north called Rocky Rococo's. Of course, it was a lunch, and as is also off to happen, I had a beer and Pastor Michael had water, and we were discussing the YRR and realized that, especially from a conservative, confessional, reformed angle, there was really no one discussing it. And so I'll let Michael introduce himself and we can go from there.
Yeah. Well, like Matt said, it's exciting. When we originally got together and kind of talked about what our goals were for the podcast, our goals for the first year, one of them had to do with the amount of downloads that we wanted to get to, and we've already surpassed that. And the other one is, I said, peak fame for me is when we finally get to be on Presbycast. So this is,
that's right.
We have to set new goals after tonight. This is, or this is the very final episode. Maybe this is the finale, but that can't be. We've got too much coming down the pike.
You've made his Napark dreams come true tonight as a past.
I definitely do suggest new goals.
Yeah.
Congratulations. Your goal was to be the worst dressed person at Walmart.
That's right. Well, my name is Michael. I'm a associate pastor in PCA Church, Christ Covenant Church in La Crosse, Wisconsin. So if you're looking at Wisconsin, we're right on the western side, right along the Mississippi.
Nobody's looking at Wisconsin.
Yes.
It's not. Yeah, it's not an election year.
Here we have it's a little bit of a northern invasion tonight, I guess, on the show. We don't quite have the southern charm that you guys have to add to our podcast, so maybe it's a little more rough around the edges.
Mm-hmm. All right, but why did you so you're eating pizza and you decide to do this, but why? Why was it important that it be done?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe it's best if we just tell our stories a little bit. One of the reasons that this would come up is because Matt and I basically shared a similar theological journey over the course of time when we would talk every couple of years and realize that we were reading the same things, following the same people, eventually kind of moving in the same direction theologically. From my side of things, I grew up in the Evangelical Free Church of America, and very much within mainline evangelicalism, as I would call it. And there was a point when all of a sudden, within the circles that I was in, some of these names started to become really popular. I've shared on our show that the first person that I really remember kind of getting me excited about the idea of Reformed theology, as it was called, was Mark Driscoll, Pastor Mark Driscoll out in Seattle, Washington. And I watched this video where he was preaching that we've done a reaction to on the Restless show. Looking back.
Say Mark Driscoll again.
Mark Driscoll.
Good.
Yeah.
Be ready with that button.
It's going to come up a lot. And so this just, guys like him, and all of a sudden, John Piper was already quite popular, but all of a sudden began to emerge into the circles that I was in within evangelicalism and become very popular. And so this put us, and me down a journey of kind of trying to learn what all this, Calvinism stuff was about, and finding it very compelling. And, maybe we can get into it more, but, over the course of time, as that kind of changed, all of a sudden I was, finding, other teachers. While I was still in high school, I would bum around in high school all day. I wouldn't really do much of my work. And then I would go home and I found all of these free lectures from seminaries like Covenant Theological Seminary and RTS. And I didn't know what they were at the time. I thought Covenant was like some Lutheran church or something like that. I didn't know what it was tied to. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know anything about Presbyterianism or anything like that. But so I started to find these things, and slowly over time, I was brought to the point of being convicted more of Reformed Presbyterianism, confessional Presbyterianism. But while Matt and I have talked, what we've found is that we know many people. We have many friends that are in maybe one of two places. Maybe they're like us, and they've kind of come out of the New Calvinism, following some of these figures, and they look back and they think, what was that? Was actually any of that good, or was it all bad, or like what happened with all this? And then there's also a large group that just nothing ever really changed for them, right? They maybe found some of these teachings. They've been reading John Piper. They've been listening to sermons. They would call themselves Reformed. They'd call themselves Calvinists, but they're still in an evangelical church. They're still in basically the same place. And so, we wanted to kind of, look back and rationalize a little bit about the movement. And for us, it's honestly just a little bit fun.
Yeah. I think for me, similarly, my story, why I was interested in it is similar to Michael's, except that I was a much harder Mark Driscoll fanboy. And so we can all groan about that together when I was 18 and
18. Okay.
I was truly young, and I was
you stayed out of prison. That's good.
I did. I was able to stay out of jail following his advice, and through an influence of a Reformed pastor and then a Lutheran pastor, right? I would have said I was in college very young. I was very glad that the college ministry I happened to be involved with became involved with a Reformed church, right? I met with the pastor. I'll never forget, for example, I once asked him, this is how far I was from any kind of historic or confessional understanding of Christianity. I was like, I'm really struggling. I don't know how to know if the men in my Bible study are Christians. And he said, well, have you ever asked them if they believe the Apostles' Creed? And I said, well, I don't believe that. That's for Catholics, was my answer. And he just very graciously, met with me, talked to me. And so at some point you realize, and if you were around the YRR circles, you heard people like Mark Driscoll even mentioning in 2009, Time Magazine calls it one of the top ideas changing the world, right? If, there was in the broadly Calvinist world, Baptist circles, right? The TGC crowd, right? This was the confluence of some kind of a revival, a resurgence of Reformed theology. We were kind of taking the world by storm, and there was all this hope. And now apart from the people like Michael mentioned, most everybody just shakes their head at TGC articles. I mean, you guys meme them better than we do. We don't try very hard, but and so a lot of people do wonder, did it go wrong? What happened? And because of the influence it has on broad evangelicals, and now even in confessional circles, these types of leaders and whether or not this movement is still going, the people who are involved are still really influential. We thought it was important to start, and no one else was doing it. And so we decided to take the unauthorized, unapproved step of beginning to podcast our way through the YRR and everything New Calvinist.
Well, let me tell you how I missed the movement. and I want to run something by you that I think was actually a formative influence that doesn't get much credit these days, and that is the Founders Movement in the Southern Baptist Convention, and that started in the late '80s really, and didn't get cranked up big time until the mid '90s. But I really think they in some senses they gave birth to the YRR. When I went to my first Founders Conference while I was still a Baptist in 1997, the only young Restless and Reform guy there was Mark Dever. And I just thought he was one of them because he spoke at the conference. He was very impressive, but he pretty quickly went out on his own and did the 9 marks thing. But because I was in the South and because I was a Baptist, I came in through MacArthur and Lloyd Jones and Spurgeon, and we had this pastor who I called. He only lasted 7 months. I predicted he would last 6. I called him the disaster pastor, and he would quote people like Neil Anderson, who's really bad news. But he liked John Piper too, and he gave me a John Piper book on fasting, which was Hungry for God or something like that. I didn't read it. I really always thought Piper was kind of creepy, and I avoided it. And then in late 2003, I went to the PCA, and I'd never heard of. And of course, that's when TGC started, 2004. And
Right.
I was sort of nonplussed by it from the beginning. I thought, okay, what's the use here? We've got all these, if you're Reformed, you've got all this good stuff. Why do you need it watered down? And so I never had a Piper phase, and I guess I'm somewhat thankful for that. Although I'm thankful for whatever good has been done there. But I missed the whole YRR thing. I'd never heard of Tim Keller until probably 2004 or 5. Of course, I heard a lot about Ligon Duncan, people like that in the PCA, but I missed the whole thing. Now Resby, he's had to drop off for a minute because of a technical problem. He went through the Acts 29 sort of phase, but I missed it. But the question is, where do you all trace it all back to? Do you go back to Piper? Is he the common denominator, or is it TGC? I mean, the book that defined the movement, wasn't that 2004 by Colin Hansen?
2008.
2008. Okay, wow. All
A
right,
little later, yeah.
So that was 3 or 4 years into TGC.
Yeah.
So where do you all trace the genesis of the movement?
Yeah, it was really interesting. One of our first interviews we did was with Rob McKenzie. He is of the Reformed Forum, and he, his opinion was very similar to yours about founders, that, in that what you saw very early, and he called it like kind of before the YRR, where when John MacArthur kind of becomes a major Calvinist figure in Baptist circles through the lordship controversy in the 80s. And then, even in Colin Hansen's book, which I've now getting ready for the show, I reread, he credits founders kind of laying the groundwork in the Southern Baptist Convention of a reacceptance of Calvinism on a wide scale. And so I think you get both of those things kind of laying the groundwork. But I do think that, especially in light of how Colin Hansen defines the movement, and the other things that came together when John Piper starts going to the Passion conferences down in the South, and he starts to write, I don't know, there are thousands of college students, and they say, talk about whatever you want, and he basically chooses Calvinism and missions every time. And he now has brought this kind of Calvinist, this kind of populist Calvinist teaching to the North, where Michael and I are from, right? I didn't know what a Presbyterian was. I just thought that was the lady who married pets down the street, right, growing up. And, it's funny.
Pastor Megan. They're all named Megan. Megan or Caitlin. Every one of them.
they were nice when when they had blood drives, but other than that, I didn't have much to do with them. And
Yeah, it's so actually the church that I pastor is literally, it almost shares a parking lot with an evangelical free church that Matt and I both grew up attending.
Yep.
And I literally, until I moved back to, I went to seminary at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. And before I finished, we moved back to this area because it's where I'm from. And we literally passed this church after being at that church for a little while. This is about 6 years ago. And I saw it, and I saw it as a PCA church, and I literally said, like, I never knew what this church was. I didn't even really, like, I knew there was a building here, but I didn't know what it was. I didn't know anything about it. And then I saw it was PCA, and I was like, no way, there's a PCA church in La Crosse. Right. That's crazy.
Yeah. And
that's the North for you. That's where we are. Like, that's, everybody's Catholic, Lutheran, or, maybe there's certain kinds of evangelical that, broke out of Lutheranism, and that's about it.
Right. I'd never met a Southern Baptist or anything. Right. And then, so what happens is these John Piper clips, right? Sermons, CDs are getting handed out in church. They are, his books are now around. R.C. Sproul's ministry, right, is becoming more popular. And so I think it's in that time period, in just around the time just before when TGC's forming in the early 2000s, and it's kind of going to come to its height, right, in, probably 2007 to 2015, and by 2015, I think it's almost gone. But yeah, Michael, do you have anything to add about the origins, where it kind of stemmed from?
Yeah, as we look at it, thanks to Rob, we really did start to look at it, maybe two phases. There was kind of a first wave of kind of the beginnings of it with, maybe what you're talking about with founders, with John MacArthur, bringing a lot of guys out of dispensationalism, especially. And then moving forward, though, where we focus, and part of it is just because it's what we, came up through, is more how the movement took off, especially with the onset of internet communication, right?
Yep.
So being able to get sermons right to people, being able to do sermon jams, and having all kinds.
Hold on. What's a sermon jam? I've never
sermon
heard of
jam.
that.
Like where they take like a John Piper and they would put some of his preaching to some kind of beat or music in the background, right? Like that kind of a thing. So these things are
usually you'd end with the nice sunglasses dropping down.
That's
some
right.
kind of reformed OG.
That's not good.
It's not regulative. That's
No.
But I do think that is important. That while for probably people coming out of a confessional circle, at a TGC conference, it's viewed as some kind of watered down thing. For us, for the young people that it was attracting at the time, for the people in their 20s and 30s, it was viewed as the intellectual, thoughtful option. Now, I just want your listeners to just take a moment and appreciate that Mark Driscoll was the thoughtful, intellectual option. He was the doctrine guy, and it's crazy, but right, that was one of its attractions, right? That it is an invitation to something historic, that it is an invitation to something defensible, scriptural, and where we just happen to have the best music, best artists, and we're gonna, take over social media. That it helps.
All right. Well, I think two things should be said, and it's sort of apparent in what you've said so far. It's essentially a Baptist movement, Baptist dominated, no doubt, and of course, I think you'll agree the Reformed moniker is not helpful. It's right. We're dealing with Calvinistic soteriology with a variety of other things and emphases hanging therefrom.
I'm glad you said the word movement, because I couldn't remember how to get to it except I don't know if you guys remember, but Tim Challies made an infographic of young Restless and Reformed New Calvinism, and it always came off as really cringy because of his overuse of the phrase "of the movement" or in the movement in different things. where it was like, there was one, it was like Wayne Grudem's systematic theology becomes the backbone of the theology of the movement. And, John Piper's embracing of rap music became an important part in the movement.
Yes.
And it's like, it's so cringy to hear it written about like that. But not in like oh, Pogs, weren't those funny sort of a way. This was more of just like maybe this was always bad. And we're actually trying to paint something bad that shouldn't be painted. It's just bad.
Well,
I'll find it. So, but the only way to Google search for it that I found it was just Chally's infographic of the movement, and it brought me like right to the blog post. So apparently, it appears. If there's 25, bullets, and there's way more of them, at least 40% of them contain the phrase. It's just, and it's really weird things in there, like, this is the year In Christ Alone was published.
Yep.
And you're just like, goodness gracious.
You're basically just talking about like what we use to plan out our shows.
We
Hey,
like-
what's next on the list? Like, let's just go down and figure
We'd
it
like
out.
to thank Tim Challis for doing our show prep for us. Making
That's right.
Making
It's
that
been so
simple.
helpful.
No, I agree, Chortles, that the term reformed, in early on, we did 3 shows trying to define what we were talking about, and we just titled them Reformed, Young, and Restless. And because the term reformed, we basically took, as it was used, meant 5 points of Calvinism, and then we sought to define a little bit more helpful understanding of reformed. And Michael, maybe you can answer, because I think we eventually started talking about how while people like Ligon Duncan, KDY, Keller interact in these circles, right, it still is a Baptistic movement, even though if there are those from a Presbyterian or Paedo-Baptist tradition involved.
Yeah, they're involved in part, but there is, this is actually when John Piper went and did his lecture at Westminster Theological Seminary about the Young, Restless, and Reformed. One of the things he says is that it's basically Baptist. There's maybe a little bit of difference, but it's basically Baptist. And so sometimes I refer to it as either maybe Calvinistic evangelicalism, or sometimes I just say Piperite evangelicalism, just to maybe distinguish it even a little bit more, because it really is just that. It's here are these 5 points, and again, for us growing up in the setting that we were, like, to have those 5 points was like, no way, this is amazing. Like, this seemed like so much. It seemed like so much to grasp and to come to. So it was a big thing for us.
Yeah, and when people would interact, right, when the Presbyterians would interact, right, we appreciated them, and they were appreciated obviously, and they're close friends. But
It was like
again,
hanging out with the smart kids finally.
Yeah, that's right. But look at how, for example, how TGC writes its statement of faith. Well, sorry guys, your position on baptism is irrelevant, right? That and therefore the default in evangelicalism is a Baptistic view, and it's then dominated by Baptistic figures. And so already, even while Ligon Duncan or these men, of course, in their churches, seminaries, they would never divorce those things, but their interactions in the Young, Restless, and Reformed movement, when they became of the movement, they largely had to divorce themselves from their views on baptism for the sake of unity and whatever of the movementness.
Yeah, and we've hearkened back to it here, like of Truman saying it all the way back in 2013, is to be a Baptist and to join the Gospel Coalition, you have to give up nothing. Like, to be a Presbyterian and to join the Gospel Coalition, you have to at least be willing to give up everything. Yeah. And at first, like, when you're not a Presbyterian and you hear that, you say, like, well, that sounds kind of mean and heavy-handed. And then you become not a Baptist, and you realize, like, oh, I was right.
Yeah, and if you're in a connectional church, which all Presbyterians are connectional, I don't see what TGC adds, except maybe to your maybe to your own self-conception as a thought leader or sort of a benevolent dispenser of the goods. But I do understand that TGC is a quasi-denomination for some of these independent churches.
Yeah.
And they have some. I mean, interestingly, there are no ruling elders or laymen on the TGC council, and there's no discipline except you can be memory hold if you screw up.
Thankfully, there are people that have saved some of the worst of the worst from the past, so we have fun reacting to those.
I mean, you can be canceled. So, there was a cancel culture at TGC. I mean, Tulling was canceled. McDonald was, although you can still find some of those videos. They're not all gone. They didn't fully scrub. But so I can see the attraction for Baptists. I could never see the attraction for Presbyterians. Now, I don't know what Michael thinks about this, but I don't know that TGC is that influential in the PCA. I don't know that a lot of guys are that aware of what goes on there, but I just have this suspicion that it drives our agenda at a kind of a top level among the great men, because when you have some of your leading figures involved with the Gospel Coalition, I can't help but think that they don't sometimes think, I wonder how this is going to play with my TGC brothers. Now, I could be completely wrong about that, but I think they influence us as much or more as we influence them. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, I've heard it said, from other guys in our presbytery, things like, I mean, we have guys who have maybe gone to, T4G or those sorts of things, maybe the Gospel Coalition. I know that there's some talk of it. I see articles shared, right, in the, PCA elders group. Sometimes TGC articles are thrown around. So it's definitely there. It's a thing. I think it is probably far more, the material itself is probably far more influential amongst the lay people. But what you even said there is interesting because, one of the things we found about, the movement in itself in many ways was, was driven by the relationships that these different people had. And the benefit for those who, are stepping in maybe from a more confessional Presbyterian world, honestly is, at least I'm not trying to speak of motives, but one of the obvious benefits is their audience just explodes. Like the size of their influence and audience by all these guys coming together, they were able to draw, pretty large numbers and man, just boost those book sales. I mean, there's just so much as far as notoriety that comes with it. And so your idea that maybe this is influencing more the guys at the top is really interesting because there is a strong kind of elitist element to it where the movement is built around, right, like these figures, these guys, like it's all built around them. They, in that sense, they are the movement, right? It is them. And so that's why it's so devastating when Mark Driscoll falls apart and, like it starts to, chip away at that because it's all about those guys. It's not actually about those who are maybe on the lower levels.
Yeah, I think it totally is on the top level, a relational, it's this relational network. We interviewed a guy, he's just published his dissertation on the YRR. It's kind of crazy that, now there's even an academic interest. And he said that this was all people getting into the right positions of power. It's not even that there were numerically that many more Calvinists. It's that Calvinists got in the right positions of power and had the right relationships. And I think that's probably, you're right in saying that that's one of the big influences on the PCA. I would say the other one that I think confessional churches find is, I think, especially from early on in TGC, what everyone started getting lazy doing is people would go, oh, I need that article on justification, I'd search it, and they'd have 20, and I could pick one from somebody relatively trusted. Now, if I do that, of course I can find trusted articles on, carpool karaoke and how that points us to the gospel and, 90s pop music. And, but what happened is that people have this kind of just, I don't know what it is. It's some bias to just kind of do what I've done, to trust some source that I trusted in the past. And now they talk on all sorts of issues that certainly most people find themselves wondering why 50% of the articles I read or titles I see, because I don't click strange links, why they feel off, and why others are the reposting Herman Bavinck or something.
You're talking basically about the CNNization of the Gospel Coalition.
Yes.
Which means that somebody is Brian Stelter at the Gospel Coalition.
Mr.
who is it?
Who is Mr. Potato?
And we are now going to pose the question to live viewers and yourselves to name who you think is the Brian Stelter of the Gospel Coalition, and why is it Trevin Wax?
Man, I was going to say it might be Colin Hansen, but it is Trevin Wax. You are, no doubt.
I did not say that. Trevin, we'd love to have you on our show if you want to come and dispute this. We would love to have you. I'm still holding out hope that I will become T4G or TGC's go-to unimportant pastor that they have on as kind of a virtue signal. So I'm still here, guys.
Actually, I don't know if you remember it, but again, it was Truman, I think, in 2012, who went on and said, hey, what if you guys had guy on who no one knew as a virtue signal? And then they sort of doubled down and said, we're never going to do this. And then they never did. So you sort of have to respect the fact that they really thought they were that big and have no desire to get small.
They thought when they had Truman out, so we did a reaction podcast to this and kind of walked through it because it's brilliant, because Truman is such a wonderful stick in the mud. And so he goes on, and I really think that they thought, hey, once we get him here, when he's right next to us, he's not going to call us out by name. And then he does. He just did it. And he just said, hey, if you mean everything you say, you could actually do what you're saying. And you say you want to help the, help the guys in the audience not aspire to, being this mega church pastor, but just be a regular faithful pastor. And that's what it's all about. So then why don't you have those guys come and speak? At least one or two. And there's kind of this weird, was he supposed to say that? This doesn't seem right. So it's brilliant.
I will say one of your live commenters went with Agent Joe Carter, which certainly has to give him a run for his money.
That's
pretty good.
Trevin came to mind, but I think I might go with Joe Carter.
That's
I'm going to officially change my pick and go with that one. But I mean, we could do this all day.
Yeah,
it's March. Maybe we should come up with a little bit of a bracket, start a little bit of a Twitter war about it.
Yeah, I mean, you could make it sort of like a, the Kuyperianism was all the rage. So you could do it where you could put Joe Carter up against Stelter, and that's your North versus South bracket. Those are your final 4 1 seeds right there.
That's right.
And then, so I guess that either makes us Tucker Carlson or Alex Jones. I don't know that I have a higher praise for myself than that.
Well, all right. Speaking of Truman, I think in 2013 he coined a term, which I thought I coined in 2015, but I'm sure I read this on Reformation 21. I coined the phrase "gospel industrial complex," and he had something very similar to that, and I could find it if I took the time. And I think it was in 2013. So I was disappointed when I realized I had sublimated that and then modified it a little bit. But he's been the most consistent and really, in a good way, vicious New Calvinism and the YRR. And he identified as early as 2013 that it was a confluence of conferences, publishers, websites, and all that. And he identified the commercial aspect of it, which I'm sure is unavoidable. Yep. Things cost money. I get that. Is there publishing and conferences? We're pretty okay.
So
there
it's
you go.
Out there for the listeners too.
All right, I may share that screen in a minute, but So let's talk about that national aspect. A lot of that was formed at conferences, which were for the fellowship-starved, newly enlightened Calvinists. So it is first a conference, and second a website, the publishing dimension. So let's talk about those things, because I think you can't really without looking at those things.
Yeah, I'll say the first person I heard use the gospel, the evangelical gospel industrial complex was Chris Roseborough. So I'll put myself on that map on the internet. And but yeah, I think that Michael and I have commented on, and certainly is so important, is that what the new Calvinists did is they adapted to new media first. I think they were some of the first in conservative evangelicalism to adapt to new media. And what is new media driven by? Well, it's driven by content. That's why there are people tuning into the Presbycast. That is why two guys can have some pizza and start a show, right? That's why people were blogging, right? That's why there's Twitter. That's why there's Gab for people like Resby and Alex Jones, right? And so, but the thing is, what you need constant content, right? And so it's a push to publishing. It's a push towards more blog articles, more conference talks, right? And so originally all the stuff they were putting out were conference talks and sermons. And then it's pushing further. Right now they've caught up, and now they're doing podcasting as well. But obviously, eventually, like you said, you have to pay for it, right? And so, and as John Piper said, and then this is where probably Pastor Michael has more to say, is right. He said we're just going to look at the gospel from every conceivable angle, and that's why so many of these books and things for so long felt like we wrote the same book 45 times, because we had to keep publishing things, but we had also determined the number of things on which we could publish were very, very limited. And so most people are capable of publishing something on the gospel. So that's kind of what happened that way.
Yeah, thinking about the especially the conference side of things, Matt pointed this out once, that really what we have in a sense is the creation of a new kind of episcopate, in a sense. Like, this is a new episcopal system where you have kind of this group of men who are kind of they're the top level, right? Like, they're the highest of level. These are the bishops, right? You have the Bishop of Minneapolis and the Bishop of Seattle, and when these guys come to town, there is this special kind of almost sacrament to go and to hear from them is a particular kind of blessing that you're going to receive, and kind of mixed with it's like this weird new Baptistic Episcopal revivalism that all kind of comes together. And so you see a lot of that, which is why, like, going to these conferences and things. And I never even went to like any of the big conferences. I was kind of disconnected from the really important parts of the movement. Also, Matt and I, like, we were never in the inner workings. We're so far from the levers of power that we didn't see the inside of the beast. We have nothing to lose. That's right, and we have nothing to lose. And so anyway, but like, when you would hear about these conferences, when our friends would go to these conferences, or when, we would, get all of the new downloads for the conference sermons, whatever it was, it's like, finally we're kind of ascending this mountaintop, and this is mountaintop experience, and it's so amazing. And then we return home, and, we kind of bring a little bit of that afterglow and glory with us. But so it's just this like really bizarre way of, viewing the faith, and, those who have spiritual power, and how that spiritual power, how that kind of different means of grace, in a sense, is given to those who show up to the conferences.
They eventually stopped it, but in, let's say up through 2016 or so, at the Gospel Coalition conferences, they would open the doors like an hour early, and all the young guys would race to the front row,
Right.
and it was very unseemly.
I would have
And-
done it.
Oh.
I probably would have done it. Looking back, I probably would have been there had I actually gone to the conference. Had I had money to go to that kind of a thing.
Yeah,
And not to
it's,
mention, then you'd have to budget like an extra like $40 or $50 for your checked bag because of all the book giveaways.
That's right.
That's right.
Books you were totally going to read
Yeah,
one
they-
day.
Yeah.
That-
The good old airdrop books, man. That was a. Yeah, no, I mean they were following the model of Passion, or if you've ever been to a college conference, right? That's what they do. That's what they do to kind of hype the crowd, right? Is you hold it. I mean, this is what you do at a concert too, right? You hold the doors until you can come in, and so yeah. Well, we realized
and
with these
sometimes it kills people.
Right.
It's there's a certain
nobody
number.
nobody was killed.
right,
I mean, it's you sort of expected that over so many years you're gonna lose so many people to a crush.
Well, no,
And
now they
You just sort of get
eventually
insurance and budget that out, and then they're just martyrs after that.
My guess is they canceled it because for you Presbyterians in your full suits, it was just unfair. You couldn't move as fast as me in my my gym shorts and T-shirt running to the front when
That's right.
claiming
Yeah,
a
but
row
you were
for my
wearing
friends.
sandals, so you were inevitably going
That's
to
true.
trip over your
That's true.
Walmart flip flops.
hold on. I've got a clip here. This is what they would sound this right before they open the doors. So anyway, that kept
boy.
the venue employees from getting hurt.
But
So
but we realize, right, with this similarity to what I'm describing with youth culture, right, that this is someone trying to take Reformed theology and try and see it through youth culture, right? This is why the young is so
yeah.
important. And in that way, Michael and I have concluded largely, and we have now done so with a PhD's consent. This is just evangelicalism. This is just evangelicalism again. And the conference circuit, I think I don't know when we were talking about this, but I just realized, it's just a model of spirituality that says pastors need revivals too, right? That's what, and that makes sense, especially in a broad evangelical
and
context.
when you say just evangelicalism, you could also say it's just revivalism, because evangelicalism is basically revivalism.
Right.
Yeah, but there's also
Oh, we lost.
in
There
a
you
meta
go.
way to say it, there's something like more juvenile about this, and so I would make the joke on Twitter like, stay tuned for my new podcast. Everything is youth group. First episode dropping soon. But that's exactly what this is. These are all kids who grew up in youth group and are now like trying to get a job in like youth group, but serious.
Yeah.
And they're still running up to the front just like they used to do at the youth camps, like every single week. There's really no difference between it, and we still see that even. I won't say it doesn't happen in like weird Presbyterian circles too. It absolutely does, but it's there's still this residual of it, and maybe it's not as bad. Maybe that's one good thing about COVID is that they're not crushing people rushing for books anymore. But
How many lives has it saved? How many lives has the shutdown really saved now that we add those numbers in?
if it just saves one, Mike.
Yeah. Just one.
Maybe-
Love your
maybe-
neighbor.
Maybe that's how
right.
you guys can convince these conference circuits for never opening again. If it saves one life.
Well, now the Gospel Coalition is meeting in person, so they're
right.
they're going
know.
to they're going to meet this year. Let me run a concept by you guys. I don't know where I got this. Probably from Daryl Hart, and I don't know if he was quoting someone or if this was original to him. And this could have been as far back as 2009 or so. But it was the idea that when evangelicals criticize celebrity or celebrity culture, like the Kardashians and the people who are famous for being famous, that it's actually hypocritical, not because just because of what we see in our own circles. But there are some, I guess they would be sociologists or anthropologists or political thinkers. Someone at some point has contended that revivalism actually invented the concept of celebrity as we know it. Prior to, let's say, the 1700s, with the revivals, with Whitfield and people like that, the only celebrities that there would be in the world might be royalty, military leaders. I read once about the kind of the first pop star. It was John Dowland. If you've ever heard the "Flow My Tears," it's a very sad song from the late 1600s, I think. He was like the first pop star all over Europe. So there weren't really celebrities in the world, but we sort of invented it with revivalism in the U.S. Even before we were a nation, with Whitfield and Wesley and those guys. But there were huge crowds. There was adoration. There was emotional excess, and there was all sorts of unseemly stuff that went on the fringes of these things. I love this story. Some newspaper correspondent was covering a Whitfield meeting, and he said he was so far from the speaker's stand that he couldn't hear anything that Whitfield was saying. But there was a young lady near him, and she was just weeping, obviously affected. And he said, "Young lady, why are you reacting like this? You can't even hear what he's saying." And she says, "Do you not see the godly wag of his head, sir?" So it sounds like it's a Beatles concert,
Yeah.
to some degree. They had terrible sound in the early 60s in those venues, but people still freaked out. So I think that's probable. I think we almost invented celebrity, and we haven't gotten away from it yet.
That's interesting. Yeah, I've never thought about it tied to revivalism before. I wonder if part of it is just the nature of kind of the way spiritual authority was seen, that all of a sudden this particular person, whether it be a Whitfield or someone like that, is particularly endowed, and everything they say all of a sudden becomes almost a kind of magic. Whatever they say, we need to listen to, because one of the hallmarks of celebrity culture is just the idea that certain people are given or have some kind of perceived authority, whether or not they are whether or not they should have it, right? Whether or not they're so you have a football player coming on and telling you what kind of car is best, or maybe you have an actor who comes on and tells you who you should vote for. This is not somebody that has any expertise in this area. This is not somebody that's proven themselves to be trustworthy in this area, and yet it's just the celebrity about them that makes you trust them. And I wonder if there is an element of that can naturally flow from kind of a sense of spiritual authority that somebody holds.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was. I don't think you can discount the way, and we touched on it earlier too, like the way Google has sort of had like an unofficial, invisible hand over all of this in terms of like content. I mean, it's been sort of nice as like a AI theological index in some ways. Is you just type in someone's name and then the topic, and then someone talking about that person talking about it, or Tim Keller baptism. How many times do you think that's been Google searched? Or
Right.
Like R.C. Sproul holiness. And those are probably some of the better examples of it. And so people are sort of like typing these things in, reading it, and then and there is a sense of like human nature that you just sort of have to like shake off of like assigning an authority to it because it's in print in some virtual sense or real sense on a site that is supposed to be trustworthy and vetted and things like that. And I had to duck out for a minute. I was having some input issues, but we talk about Driscoll being a part of and even on the Gospel Coalition Council for a while,
Right.
But how long was Tullian Tchividjian's blog hosted on there as well?
Yep.
And so all the while the worst of their worst parts were going on at the same time, and they were just given that authority and conduit to speak to millions of people.
I think there are. I think there are two.
Only one. Let me say, only one former TGC figure has been accused of hiring a hitman. Only one.
Dude,
We
And I think
can't
that's pretty
wait
good.
to get into that one. By the way, to break that one down.
to get involved in the comic supervillain who was
Yes.
apparently involved. That I think in evangelicalism, celebrity culture, right? Celebrity culture is kind of the commoditization of fame, right? Can I sell my fame, right? Is it marketable, right? And then obviously you have mass media. I think a distinction Michael and I want to make eventually is the difference between public figures and celebrities. Because, right, the church has always had public figures because we discuss things openly, right? But in evangelicalism, celebrity culture is super influential for a few reasons. One, it's pretty easy to become an evangelical celebrity comparatively to other fields. Two, in evangelicalism, did I get a lot of people to a thing makes it a justifying event. If I attracted a lot of people to a website, event, or something I'm doing, that automatically means this was part of God's wonderful plan for my life and theirs.
We count people because people count.
That's right.
Don't you
Right.
know that?
That I do know that. And that's exactly why Peter did and why I've heard every number count of people in the Bible so many times. And the final one is in more independent circles, and you even do see this I'd say even in the PCA, right? Where the name of a celebrity kind of becomes my denominational brand, right? I am right if you don't have a strong connectionalism, a strong denomination, well, we're kind of one of those John Piper churches, right? That tells people a lot about your church immediately, and you can do this within, in are you part of the Tim Keller tribe, right? There's a good word, tribe.
Yeah, so we've said even on the show, like in lieu of a strong confession, what happens is these personalities actually become your confession. They become your distinctive instead of having some kind of doctrinal confession.
Right. That's
Okay,
why I was
so-
a Driscoll guy.
We would
That's
be remiss if we didn't mention the fact that the Gospel Coalition has their own confession of faith, or their own catechism, and there are PCA churches who, on their website at least, that's the confession of faith or the catechism or whatever, the New City Catechism that they use. That rubs me the wrong way a little bit, you might imagine. Maybe.
Well, I don't know.
people-
It's not like we had one already.
Or
This
or
was a
more
joke.
than-
If any of my session is listening, this was a joke.
Yeah. So it certainly, the Gospel Coalition sort of does present almost as a denomination. I haven't done it for a long time, but I used to kind of call the greatest hits from the TGC job board. And let's just say almost anybody can post on there. And there's some interesting job descriptions. That's all. And the most interesting ones are in the worship leader section. But
Of course.
it's been a long time.
Can I say too? I'm just thinking that part of the buildup of this particular kind of celebrity culture, I think no doubt just has to do with the internet and the way that people again perceive through social media, through like even a podcast or something like this, the way that people they perceive the people on the other end in a different way. So this has even happened for us. Like we started this podcast and it's nothing, right? I mean, there is nothing like special about what we do. And all the glamour of any
don't
kind of
undersell
podcast
it.
was taken away when we were just like, hey, we're eating pizza. Why not start a podcast? And we did it. And so, but we've had people that are like, wow, like you guys really did it. And we're like, no, like, I don't think you understand like how, like anybody with a cell phone can just do what we're doing. But I think there is a sense in which when you like, you hear something, through this particular app, or you watch this video on YouTube, whatever it might be, I think it gives a certain kind of, I don't know, maybe allure, or it makes it look like, oh, wow, this is a much bigger deal than maybe it actually is. And so you get this perceived idea that this person matters more than they actually do. So we've said, hey, even the the Gospel Coalition or like any of these kind of big EVA celebrities, to the rest of the world, they literally mean nothing. Like in the greater sense of things, like nobody's going to like point them out in a crowd unless they're at one of these conferences or something like that. But there's this perceived authority or perceived celebrity that just comes through because of the medium that you're using.
Well, I'm going to link to this Carl Trueman article in the show notes, but he just nailed it. I haven't read this in years, but everything we've said tonight is covered in this article. And as to what you just said, Michael, about the kind of the magnifying power of a platform of some kind, of a blog or a podcast. Listen to what Truman said. Leaders would gradually and sometimes self-consciously become brands, the instruments of fostering that intimacy of strangers, which is such a part of celebrity culture. For example, the faux chumminess of all those tweeted exchanges and retweets, lives lived as soap operas mediated by the internet would feed smoothly, humbly, and imperceptibly into the building of one's brand. Now, we often joke that we're a lifestyle brand, not a podcast, and that's why we make so much of tacos and that sort of thing. That's really a spoofing of this whole idea that our weird personal proclivities make any difference to anything. So, this Truman piece is just marvelous, and I don't really see how he could have nailed it any better. Just astounding, and everyone should read that.
Yeah. I mean, what you find over time is, right, New Calvinism defended itself against a number of critics over time, and most of the critics ended up being mostly right about most of the things that they said, and so you kind of are left wondering, right? And this is part of the purpose of the show is when we are critical of these things, we have, again, people like me and lots of guys who are like, well, I kind of thought I was starting to understand these things, and we want to be a welcoming place where you don't have to feel like you play catch up, right? And because not everyone's motivated to do that, and so we are, we're happy to cover things like family worship, right? What is the regulative principle? Like those kinds of issues as a contrast, right? We basically are, if we're doing anything, we're teaching by contrast on the show. And so, and we also are nostalgic, of course, for those glorious scrubbed clips online. We're going to be doing one that Pastor Michael has found where James McDonald and Mark Driscoll are chiding Mark Dever over his not believing in a multi-site church model. It is.
Yeah, we did.
It's a glorious.
I think it was right around the James McDonald time. We had Dan Borvin on to talk about that. He was actually once a member at Harvest many years back, okay. And it's spectacular.
Yeah. It's amazing. So one of the things that allowed me as a young man to not get so pulled into all of this because there were times when I was in the mind space that it was like, yeah, like the only way that I can work to really help the church and to bring this, kind of revival anywhere is to move to one of these big cities and to, like help to, expand the ministry of one of these, big figures. The thing that kept me from doing that was just like a regular pastor who, came alongside of me, put up with the really cringe side of cage stage Calvinism, and just help point me to, older teachers, more weathered, mature men. And I remember him sitting down and being like, hey, you got to watch this video. And he showed me those one, with Mark Dever and McDonald. And I don't remember when, in the process this was, as far as, how influenced am I by these guys, how not. I think Truman actually played a really big role in me kind of slowly, walking away from a lot of this movement. Just seeing some of the inner workings through his, talk about Big Eva and the gospel industrial complex. But we watched that video, and it just, I was like, wow, yeah, that is a really like sad contrast to watch.
And my reaction was, go Driscoll. Go Driscoll. I was still.
Get him.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an important thing. Is it like there was sort of, what is it that I should know it, but I don't. But again, it's the low information Presby of record. There's that like great English sketch comedy bit with the two guys are down in the trenches, and they look at each other and they look at the eagles on their heads and the red armbands, and they look at all the skull imagery, and are we the baddies?
Yes.
And
great clip.
There is a moment in YRR and New Calvinism where you realize who you've been defending and sort of going to bat for, and then you're like, am I defending the bad guys, but not in the cool way? Like everyone sort of wanted to be Hulk Hogan in WCW after the NWO formed. Like that was cool to be the bad guy, but this was like what if these guys are doing like actual bad? And so everyone sort of has that exact same moment. I mean, there was, I think, one of the first when we were. I don't know, maybe a couple years old. It must have been in the first couple years of the pod, but I remember, and it was our listener Sylvia, who's just an amazing finder of things that people wish didn't exist. And I had done this. I was like, if someone can find me this clip, I will order you a Presbycast shot glass and have it shipped to you from the old Tetzel boutique. And as we used to say, open 6 days a week. And it was a clip of Driscoll where it was like right after Real Marriage came out, and he had stopped wearing the Mickey Mouse T-shirts. He had stopped wearing just like the Hurley bro kind of get up, and he started wearing like sweater vests and plaid and like brogue shoes. And someone asked him about it, and he grew a beard. And I mean, his answer was of like, I'm repositioning myself. I'm not this cool guy anymore. Is I want to be like the wise father to all these people who are coming to me with questions, and I want to look like a guy who would know the answers. And I think it's somewhere deep in the bowels of Presbycast direct messages. I'd have to go way, way back and find it, unless she's good enough to post it in the comments here. But I mean, it was a video interview, and he's sitting there in his sweater vest and slim fit plaid shirt, which at the time, not casting judgments, but it was an athletic cut, and so it was just, that was one of those moments where like, maybe there's a lot more branding going on than we really thought about.
King of the brand, really king of the brand.
Mm-hmm.
We just watched together interview recently. Driscoll he's back. Evidently, he never totally went away.
No,
we actually have a screenshot of this. Whoever runs his Twitter page accidentally liked retweet of one of
Retweeted it.
our shows, and they quickly deleted it. But we have it. We have a screenshot of it so that we have it, for all of time to show
Pastor
anybody
Mark,
who watched.
if you are a Presbycast listener, we do this on every medium we can. If you'd like to come on the show, we'd love to talk to you.
We would. We'd love to talk to you. But he's on. He went on the Steven Crowder YouTube show, and Steven Crowder at one point asked him. He says something like, "There's some criticism that's been too harsh toward me, and some that's been right." And Steven Crowder asked him, "Well, what criticism was right?" And basically, his answer was, "Well, I was a young, really cool guy, and I made a giant church, and it went great." It's so funny. It's so good to watch. It's King of the Brand.
What's great about this interview, and I think this is how Driscoll is, and we can joke he is a king of branding though. One, Crowder is asking him actually really good questions. Crowder's asking him questions like, so what is the Bible's view of men and women? Right? He at one point says, so tell me, what does the Bible say about Calvinism? You were famous for that. Right? He asks him straight questions about the Bible that Driscoll just avoids, right?
Completely,
just does not
100%.
answer.
Doesn't say a word.
And so, but what's interesting is what Driscoll, I think, has seen is he's seen TGC, all the circles he used to run into, kind of embracing the woke, right? And kind of ostracizing, these large conservative swaths, the unwashed Trump voter, who might be watching right now, and saying, oh, I can position myself for those people. And so, right, he goes on Crowder, and he even chides, all the Reformed evangelicals are going woke, and his reasoning now is crazy, right? He oh man, it's so bad. He's like the reason Protestants, Stephen, are likely to go for the woke or the Black Lives Matter protests is because Protestants mean protests. And and this is a direct quote, if you have one group protesting here and one group protesting there, eventually they're going to converge into one big protest.
It's so real. It's real. You can look it up.
That's literally WCW and WWF becoming one company. And it was the worst thing that ever happened in the wrestling business.
And so So I think that, right, we even asked our listeners if they wanted us to review some of his new. They published a video called His Preaching Rants or This, and people wanted us to talk about that because, again, they see him raise concerns they probably have with Reformed evangelicals, but also he still seems off. And so, yeah, it was wild. It was wild.
This is one of the reasons I actually think kind of, tying into what we said a little bit ago, the idea of, seeing some of these things and wondering, hey, are we actually not on the right side here? I think there's a lot of people, we seem to be getting people who are listening who like they see a lot of the stuff coming out right now, kind of defending a lot of the social justice and movements like that on the secular side. And they're like, wait a minute, I don't think I'll follow you there, but I don't know why you're going there. I thought you were like the standard bearers of truth. And so how are you kind of jumping into some of this stuff? And so, there's a lot of people out there who are kind of confused. They're like, wait, was this wrong the whole time? Is this all wrong? What's good about it? What's not? And that's what we're trying to, I guess, answer.
And I thought that the 5 points of Calvinism and justification by faith were enough to hold us all together and keep us as the super friends forever. Right. And now everybody's kind of mad at everyone, and now they're even more.
Really just the word for the friends we made along the way.
Yeah. And now there are even more conferences, right, that I have to choose between, because as soon as you do an MLK conference, these guys did an anti-social justice conference, and it just continues to diverge in those ways.
All right, so one of the questions I've always had, one of the things that's bothered me, was why some of these very intelligent men didn't do something about, didn't see what was coming with Driscoll and Tullian and some other people, and McDonald. Mm-hmm. There's evidence that some did see it coming, but they still didn't do anything about it. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you all read this, and I don't remember the man's name, but he was one of Driscoll's assistants, and he did a lot of writing after Mars Hill broke up. That's Mark Driscoll's church. and he was the director of the Resurgence at one point, which was a publishing or conference or church planner training thing.
Oh,
And
I
he
used to
said,
I used to read. I mean, it was like my daily.
Oh yeah,
Me
like,
too.
all the time.
Wake up, check the internet, hit refresh, and by the time I got to work, like hit refresh again because there was something I missed posted late Eastern, and then there'd be something like posted early Pacific, like every time.
Yep.
okay, anyway, this guy turned out to be one of the good guys, one of the better guys in the ashes of Mars Hill. But he recounted in one of these long blog posts he did, I mean, just a few months after the Mars Hill crack up, and his name was something like Carson, or I forget what his name was.
Was it Wilkinson?
No, he had that. He was a worship leader, and he had that worship leader name. You know, they all have those names. But anyway,
Well,
he was an okay guy. Let me tell his story. He said he got he went to New York or some big city where there was a big meeting of Gospel Coalition YRR type people, and he runs into Tim Keller on the elevator or on the stairs, and he says, "Hey, I work for Mark Driscoll. I'm the director of the Resurgence." And he said that Tim Keller thumped him in the chest with his fingers and said, "The Resurgence will not be directed." In other words, he's saying it's all about Driscoll. You don't control anything, pal.
Well, that
So
was
Keller saw it coming, and he didn't do anything about it. That's what really gets me.
mean,
where
well, we
where
even
were the
had-
adults?
Remember, I mean, we had Jed Ostich on this about all the ghostwriting that used to go on that website as well. I think one of the things that, and this is, so I grew up in Southern California, and if there's anyone who was supposed to be a Thrice fan, it should have been me, and yet I wasn't.
It's too bad, man.
Well, all of their albums that only have one-word titles are good or fine. If the album title has more than one word in it, I skip it. I did a full like deep dive on this one day, but Mars Hill wanted to plant and actually did at one point in Orange County, California, and Dustin Kentry, the singer of Thrice, became their worship leader before eventually going up to Washington, if I remember, and put out like a rocky praise and worship album, which actually wasn't bad. He's a wonderful solo artist. But all that to say is that if you go on, if you were to go to his social pages now, he is a one-man burned over district because of that experience. And I even remember tweeting at him at the collapse of Mars Hill. I was like, please don't let this sully your view of things you were introduced to. Like, I think I even tweeted, like, this is the Napark Church directory. There are so many churches in your local area who would love to welcome you in and show you that what you had was a bad experience and not the actual thing that you're mistaken for. And at this point, he went far left, maybe for many other reasons. But I think we would be naive to think that the collapse of Mars Hill didn't have a huge reason for it or was a big catalyst.
Right. I Dustin Kensrew, he was, if you kind of follow some of the worship rock bands they had there, you see them on it was Mike Anderson. I was going to say that. I just
okay.
You find that there are now varying levels of orthodoxy inside of them. And one of the things, honestly, that really kind of triggered this idea for me kind of long ago is I think it's kind of fallen apart, which is probably a very, very good thing. But the Bad Christian podcast, right? Which are two members of Emory, and it used to be another pastor, and two of them were members at Mars Hill, and they started making this podcast after Mars Hill, and it was them admitting they were bad Christians and kind of coming to how what could Christianity be like for them, just admitting they were bad Christians. And what it is it's three guys talking themselves into progressive Christianity.
Oh, yeah.
And two guys basically talking themselves out of the faith. I don't know for sure, but I think they're the guys in Emory are at least gone. And so, this is why it deserves to be criticized, because while Michael and I, we don't downplay the good. We don't downplay, right. I've been in Mars Hill. I went to Seattle, right. This is, I was into it, and we know there are lots of people who were helped, who found more confessional wings, but there's a lot of real harm that has come.
Yeah.
And it needs to be reckoned with, and we still aren't ready to do that, it seems, on a large scale yet. And obviously at the time, people didn't want to do it.
John Piper has no regrets.
He has no regrets. If you know that clip, Piper was asked in an interview after Driscoll's burnout at Mars Hill. Someone, they have to do an Ask Pastor John every day, so it was going to come up eventually. And so they do. What do you think about Mark Driscoll now that this has all happened? And the first sentence out of his mouth is, John Piper has no regrets. And I guess not, because again, I think in his lecture to Westminster, if you listen to the first 10 minutes of it, he calls himself a father to New Calvinism, right? So it's
really,
he was trying to, because right, he is, as far as these figure goes, right, he at least, while I certainly find issues, but he's at least a generally upstanding guy, right? I guess I'm playing comparison, right? Someone hired a hitman. It's going to be hard not to.
You look pretty good next to that. That's you're not the worst dressed at Walmart at that point.
Yeah,
John Piper is a good guy. No moral problems. No,
right.
He's
We feel bad for him
person.
because he feels like he had this fatherly role and it was tied to a lot of these worst case scenario kind of guys.
Yeah.
All right, so before we run completely out of time, I want to make, since we're talking a lot about the Gospel Coalition, one of my favorite subjects. Two more observations. I've noticed in the past 3, 4, 5 years that the content is dominated, and a lot of the staffers, the main articles, dominated by PhD students from Southern Seminary in Louisville. I mean, that's just like if you're a PhD student at Southern Seminary, you get to write or work for the Gospel Coalition. And so that's the Moeller influence, but there are other elements there too that we know about, and you mentioned the woke stuff earlier, so there's that influence as well. But also, of course, if you look at the size of the denominations and the congregations, the PCA is still very overrepresented, at least on the council. There aren't a lot of PCA figures who write for the Gospel Coalition, I don't think. But in leadership, we're overrepresented. But what's vastly overrepresented for their size are Anglicans. And I think that's very interesting too, because I think the future of evangelicalism in this country looks Anglican. In this respect, they are much more egalitarian than any of your Baptists or even the PCA. There are female ministers in the Anglican, the conservative Anglican union. They arguably have some weaknesses on the whole gay Christian issue, although they've actually come down more strongly against use of that term than the PCA has to date. but I think the future looks. I mean, Christianity today is dominated by Anglicans, or historically has been, and there's a little more interplay with denominations who are friendly to female elders and female ministers that I'm comfortable with. So I think the evangelicalism, even the conservative reformed evangelicalism of 10 years from now, will look a lot more like the EPC and parts of the Anglican Church, which conveniently also have a lot of charismatics, than the PCA of today. So I think the future is more egalitarian, and I don't know if the Gospel Coalition has really helped us in that respect.
The future is Anglican. I think that you're right. I think there was probably an inherent weakness in the kind of complementarian, I'd call it kind of compromise that existed, right? That not that there's I'm just saying that the TGC, the new Calvinist form of complementarianism, is we defend the two verses, right? We defend one verse that
says something,
that says women cannot teach or have authority over man, and that we defend the verse in Ephesians that says the husband, right, is the head of his wife, right? And those were the two verses, right? That was it all. And that's not sufficient, right? That's not a fully formed thing. But to kind of earn credibility with the culture, we've entertained all of these kinds of things. And so I think that without more foundations, without confessional foundations, without more even biblical foundations, and perhaps even natural law foundations, all we have are those. It's going to be hard to hold those two verses when there's an entire, as you mentioned, entire egalitarian wing of the church who spends all their time writing different interpretations and understandings of those two verses, right? That's what they do.
Well, let me make another prophecy. If you've read the Gospel Coalition carefully in the past, I'd say 3 years, in particular, you read more and more about Methodism and the so-called evangelical or conservatives left in the UMC, which we know is about to split. Mm-hmm. And I guarantee you, the Gospel Coalition has their eyes firmly fixed in maybe in a covetous way. I'm saying that tongue in cheek on the Methodists. So that it's already been said that the conservative evangelical Methodists are going to keep their female preachers and their female officers.
Who was it that he said he basically lumped John Wesley in with Calvinists anyways?
Yeah, Trevin Wax. Yeah,
just what a
yeah. But there's been a lot written about that, and who is the guy? Mark Tooley, pretty good guy, who's Methodist, and I think Tommy Kidd has written a bit about them. But anyway, that's going to be a temptation for the coalition because that's a big chunk of market and a big bunch of people they think they can help, but it's never a one way thing. And I think, again, the future is egalitarian, and the Anglicans, the EPC crowd, the Methodists of the future, and some elements of the PCA are gonna bend more that way. So, again, if there weren't PCA people involved, there are very few non-PCA NAPARC people involved with the Gospel Coalition. But if there weren't PCA people in leadership, I wouldn't care what the Gospel Coalition did. But I think I have to care, and I think a lot of people think that's unnecessary and overblown and unhealthy. But I can't help but be concerned.
I mean,
So
do you
briefly,
think,
go ahead.
well,
Go ahead, Recipe.
I was going to say, I mean, it seems like, and maybe it's just the fact that I'm not in the PCA anymore, that I don't pay as much attention to it, but like, it seems to me like some of the Gospel Coalition stuff is probably the least impacting on the PCA that it's been in a number of years, because of the number of people who sort of have like drifted away from it as much. But obviously, it's still, I think it's still one of those like most frequently visited sites for a lot of people sitting in the pews. It, not the pastors, but I think, I'm wondering if it would be, that was a jumping off point for a lot of people, or if they've just sort of moved into, sort of other fields, or founded their own organizations, and then folded those, and then got hired by other people as a part of their larger organization. So, thoughts, or just say I'm wrong, and I won't be offended.
So we've done a lot of, mostly we've made connections. Some criticizing, some a little bit tongue in cheek. But you guys are, Michael, you're a pastor in the PCA, and Matt, I know you may be serving in the PCA in the not too distant future. And tell people what's better than coalitional Christianity. We're not just saying what's the alternative. What's the beauty and the good of true confessional, connectional Protestantism?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe in the context of what we've been talking about, one of the things that first comes to mind is simply accountability, right? To have a system of graded courts where you're never in the place where you say, hey, this one guy said what we're going to do as a large church, and we just have to do it. And if we don't, we're like under discipline and we're kicked out, or this one pastor is really taking things in a poor direction. And I've tried to bring my concerns to him, but he won't listen. And there's literally nothing I can do now. Like, it's over. I'm like, there's nothing else I can do. Well, that doesn't have to be the case. This is the beauty of Presbyterianism, that you do have a place of appeal to bring those kinds of concerns, and it allows then for accountability on all, in every direction. At least ideally, maybe it breaks down sometimes, but it does allow for accountability in a way that you just don't have in these other systems.
Yeah, I think that there is, right, the short, the maybe the Baptist answer, right, is that it's more biblical, but there's so much more, right? You're welcomed into a entire house. You're welcomed into an entire system of thought and faith and practice that has accountability, and right, has a place for kids. Right, my kids can come in. I already have a catechism, right? It frees you, right? What ended up kind of, I didn't have a super hard breaking point with New Calvinism. Just as I went to church with grown-ups week after week and saw they didn't care about any of that, they didn't know, they weren't aware, right? It was a very small church. I just found myself, the actual local church I was with, the actual there was more to talk about, there was more to life, there was more to faith than these 5 points or these things, and being challenged on things like, do you do family worship, right? Those kinds of questions were deeply impactful to me, and things I had never even considered. And I'll say it's a lot cheaper to be in a confessional thing, because I don't feel any need to buy the books. I don't need to have a, there was this, what's the really big book everyone's talking about right now in those, Gentle and Lowly or something. Maybe
Gavin Ortland, I think.
Yeah.
It is.
Yep. Haven't read it. I just know it's about Jesus's heart and his emotional life. And I tweeted the other day that, I have a hard time believing that's better than B.B. Warfield's masterful and much shorter and for free online essay on the emotional life of our Lord. Right? These the constant need to retread new content, right, oftentimes pushes out our attention for what is probably better, and it might take more work to work through, but is a better meal, like tacos, right? It's a better meal like tacos.
Yeah, an excellent value.
Yeah.
So, another thing I would say that is a great benefit of a confessional, ordinary means of grace church is sort of the fixity of it. I think evangelicalism has always been built on constant change. I mean, it thrives on change. I know when I was a Baptist, that was certainly the case, and every month on the Gospel Coalition, there's a new list of 40 movies you should see, or 50 songs for the pandemic, and I don't want to have to. I don't want another 40 or 50 pieces of content that I have to consume, and I don't want everything we sing on Sunday to change every 6 months or year.
Right.
Or 5 years, hopefully.
Yeah.
The boring part of it is really a selling point.
It's
for me.
a feature. It's a feature, not a bug,
That's right.
Yep. Because whether it's the Trinity hymnal, whether it's the Trinity Psalter, right? Any of these things, right? It was this mind-blowing experience when I realized there were people who were actually good at music and actually good at theology, put a lot of thought into picking these songs that have been sang, right, as far back as the Gloria Patri, right? We have, songs into the early 1900s. And that, what if you wanted to sing what the church has kind of sang around the world and has sang for hundreds of years? That might be a value than just singing the thing closest to K-Love, or, if you were me, like the Driscoll, right, the closest thing I could do to punk rock as a worship song. And how that was a value. And as I've gotten to travel, I've been in other places in the world, you watch evangelicals oftentimes try and import these American worship songs into other places, right? Let's talk about culture. Do you know how little sense it makes, right? When it's a song that's kind of written for, we love you, suburban minivan soccer moms, but your experience is a very distinct experience. And it doesn't reflect the church's Catholic existence, its historic existence. And it is a kind of a one note. It really hits one note. I'm not feeling the best today, but Jesus is better. Thank you. Whereas the Psalms, the Trinity hymnal, they express a wide range of praise to our Lord, a wide range of confession, of claim of assurance that is much healthier and maybe is more boring, but it is, as you said, it's stable, right? Your kids can learn it all.
Can I just add, one of the things we've talked about before is that, with worship service that follows the regulative principle, there's not a lot of room to hide. Like, you can't hide from the Word of God and from the ordinary means of grace, and you just, like, you can't get away from it. You can't, like, the technology of it, the lights and the show of it. This just allows you to get by on something that is not the real deal. And what we do week after week then is just put forward the truth. We just put forward the gospel and the Lord Jesus himself being portrayed as crucified. And you're just, right then, you're just forced to just, this is either what I'm going to accept or I'm going to not accept it, and that's it. There's no other room. There's no room to hide yourself in the midst of it. And so it's also just portable. It's, not only the fact that it, comes from all kinds of different times and cultures and the way we do things, but it can, you can take it anywhere. Where I was talking to one of our elders not long after the, pandemic stuff was coming through, and I thought, if we had to, we could basically meet in a field and like everything that we do for worship on a Sunday can easily be done. We can meet outdoors. We can do this anywhere. We can do it all.
Well, you could set the grass on fire to simulate the smoke machine.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's, it's such a good point that, right, but when new Calvinists or people who are like, I heard that smart Presbyterian at the Gospel Coalition, if they show up to Michael's church, they go, oh, what are you doing here?
Yeah.
Right? Wait,
I've had conversations with young guys who are like, man, I really like the stuff that you're like teaching and talking about. And I'm like, and they're like, well, I want to come to your church. And I'm like, listen, I know you, I would love to have you at my church. I really would. But let me tell you what's going to happen. You're going to come and you're never going to come back again. And they don't. And like, not that this happens every time. And I don't challenge everyone that way. I've just done that a couple of times with guys that I, are of that mold.
Well, and this is something I meant to say earlier, but it fits in based on what you just said. If Presbyterians' involvement in the YRR movement and the Gospel Coalition, if it had really been worthwhile, I think we would have seen two things. We would have seen Baptists becoming Presbyterian. Now, there have been a few. The PCA has a number of ministers who came in from who were Baptists, Todd Pruitt being one of them. Mm-hmm. I know a guy in North Carolina, don't agree with him on a lot, but he actually took a Baptist church into the PCA. I mean, they did they flipped the whole script. But you all haven't heard of a lot of TGC. Well, there haven't been any celebrity figures who've made the switch. I mean, Joe Thorne became a Presbyterian, I think. He was sort of.
I think he's a 1689 Baptist.
Oh, is he? Okay, I thought he became. Okay, well,
he's got it tattooed on his hand, so I hope he didn't. I hope he didn't make the switch.
Les
I hope he did.
You're right. He can apologize for the tattoo if he did, but
sure. Well, my point is there haven't been many defections, and I guess something that there's very little ecclesiological focus, and I would be impressed if a lot of Baptists started saying we need to be more connectional. We actually need some accountability. Now, the SBC is trying to do it from the top down with a registry, and they got this small committee that can, disfellowship people.
Yeah, nothing's going to go wrong there.
Right. But what if Baptists became more Presbyterian in their church government? I mean, it'd be good for them, even if they were still Baptists. We haven't seen those things. We haven't seen a lot of defections. So I just wonder who's changing who. Yeah. And anyway, that's my concern. Yeah. But we love everybody here on the Presbycast. We've had Baptists, Episcopalians, numerous Lutherans, and maybe even some generics of some sort or another. So, as we wrap up, anything either of you want to say, and Resby, anything you need to get off your chest that's fit for family consumption?
I'll defer to our guests first.
Yeah, well, you can check out our podcast where we have conversations and we watch the good, the bad, and the Mark Driscoll of the clips of the YRR. And you can find it, I don't know, kind of wherever you listen to your podcasts. It's Restless. We've got a cool little Calvin guy. And so it's been great hanging out, talking YRR with you guys.
Yeah, it's really enjoyable. Added some to our thoughts about how to look at the whole of the movement. I'm glad we could come on. Glad we have to set some new goals.
Oh, yeah, we recommend that. Absolutely. Well, Resby, I think it's time for you to wrap us up, as you always do.
Yeah, I mean, this has been great because it's sort of like before you go in and delete them all, it's sort of like going way, way back on your Facebook and looking at all of the old pictures. That's sort of what this sort of like rear view looking is. But it's important, I think, to go back and look at it, to know where you came from, to see how you got there. And there is a sense in which, and I think I've episode some generic amount of time back, is like, I'm grateful for all of this insofar as that it brought me here. Beyond, I'm not willing to go beyond that, but I'm willing to go that far, is to say, I don't have a weaker view of God's providence because of how it got me to where I am today. So I am grateful for that. But also, you have to go back and just laugh at yourself and laugh at these things we used to do and not take ourselves so seriously, and realize that this is all sort of vanity in some ways, and know that, thank goodness, the promises and covenants of God haven't changed, that we can still all, be a part of it and look back on it and see how, good fruit has been born in different places. But that's probably more serious than most people might expect me to close a show. But I mean, this is very much something, at least the three of us, the two guests, lived it. I mean, we were there. We were, I had to actually apologize to a friend of mine who is no longer a Christian, I don't think, but I remember apologizing and be like, you were right about Driscoll. I mean, you called it years ahead of time, and I shook you off and basically like marginalized your opinion. So like, thanks for not, punching me or storming out of my house when I was, quite rude to you, but like, you were right. Yeah. And so looking back on it, we can kind of see it and hopefully avoid the same errors, or at least help other people to try to avoid the same errors as well. But thank you guys for coming on, Matt and Michael. This has been awesome. We're at Presbycast on Twitter. If you, we'll try to retweet and link out as best we can at Presbyterian. At Chortles Weekly. We did find the Sweater Best video. We at least found the link to it. Unfortunately, it has been taken down, or you have to be granted access to view it. And so if you are a listening person who is the owner of that video, please open it back up. The people deserve to see this. This is good for everyone to see. And, I think Mark Driscoll just bought a brand new Ford Bronco with the money that I'm sure was ethically tithed through his new church. So I will close on that and just recommend that you don't be an Erdman.
On the internet worldwide.